When Marcus Sullivan uploaded his DNA to a genealogy database, he expected distant cousins and perhaps a surprise ethnicity percentage. Instead, the results flagged chromosomal anomalies that no commercial lab could explain. Markers that didn't match Homo sapiens, yet were undeniably human. Within 48 hours, federal geneticists arrived at his isolated Washington cabin with a question that shattered everything he knew about himself. "Mr. Sullivan, have you ever wondered why you've never been sick a day in your life?" The rain hammered Marcus Sullivan's cabin roof with the relentless percussion of a Pacific Northwest November, each drop a bullet against cedar shingles. He sat at his kitchen table, the laptop screen casting blue light across his weathered face, illuminating the email he'd read 17 times in the past hour. The subject line remained unchanged. Urgent. Regarding Genome Quest sample. SU 447821M. Marcus was 43 years old, 6'8", and had never once visited a doctor in his adult life. Not because he was reckless, but because he'd never needed to. No colds, no flu, no broken bones, despite a youth spent logging in some of the most dangerous terrain in Washington state. His mother had always said he was built different, a phrase he'd taken as genetic luck, Scandinavian stock from his father's side, hardy indigenous resilience from hers. The email shattered that comfortable narrative. "Dr. Sullivan, your sample has been flagged for critical review by our genetics team. Certain markers in your autosomal DNA do not correspond to known human haplogroups. We've forwarded your case to the National Institute of Health for urgent follow-up. Please contact us immediately." Marcus had submitted the DNA test on a whim 3 months ago, after his father's funeral. He'd wanted to understand the gaps in his family tree. His mother had died when he was 12, taking her stories with her. His father, a taciturn logger who'd raised Marcus alone in these mountains, had always deflected questions about his wife's family. "She came from the deep woods," he'd say. "That's all that matters." Now Marcus understood that evasion differently. A knock on the door made him flinch. He wasn't expecting anyone. The nearest neighbor was 8 miles down a logging road that became impassable in heavy rain. He approached the door cautiously, peering through the side window. 2 figures stood on his porch. A woman in a government-issued rain jacket, dark hair pulled back severely, and a man holding a waterproof case marked with biohazard symbols. Both wore badges clipped to their belts. Marcus opened the door. "Mr. Sullivan?" the woman said, water streaming off her hood. "I'm Dr. Alexis Chen, Genomics Division, NIH. This is Dr. Robert Ortega, Evolutionary Anthropology. May we come in?" "Do I have a choice?" Marcus asked, stepping aside. They entered, bringing the smell of wet Douglas fir and institutional authority. Dr. Chen set a tablet on his kitchen table, while Dr. Ortega positioned the case carefully, as if it contained something fragile or dangerous. "Mr. Sullivan, what we're about to discuss is protected under the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, but it also falls under national security protocols," Dr. Chen began, her voice clinically neutral. "Before we proceed, I need your verbal consent to continue this conversation." "You're already in my house," Marcus said. "Keep talking." Dr. Chen activated the tablet, displaying a chromosome map. "Your sample triggered alerts because of anomalies on chromosomes 2, 7, and FOXP2 regulatory regions. Specifically, you possess genetic markers consistent with archaic hominin introgression, similar to Neanderthal or Denisovan admixture, except the sequences don't match any catalogued ancient DNA." Marcus stared at the color-coded bands, understanding none of it. "In English?" Dr. Ortega leaned forward, his voice gentler. "You have DNA from a human species we don't have on record. Not modern Homo sapiens, not any known archaic population, something that diverged from our lineage approximately 750,000 years ago, but continued to interbreed with humans as recently as—" He paused, checking his notes. "Your maternal grandmother's generation." The cabin seemed to tilt. Marcus gripped the table edge. "That's impossible." Your genome is approximately 47% non-sapiens, Dr. Chen said, enlarging a section of the map. The paternal contribution is entirely modern human, European and Yakama tribal ancestry. The maternal side, however, shows consistent homozygous blocks of these archaic sequences. Your mother wasn't just a carrier. Based on the inheritance pattern, she was likely 90% or more of this population. Marcus's throat closed. He thought of his mother, quiet, strong, with eyes too large and too dark, who could navigate the Olympic wilderness in total darkness, who spoke in a language his father never learned, who died in these mountains and made his father promise to bury her where the moss grows north. What population? Marcus whispered. Dr. Ortega opened the case, revealing vials of preservative solution, swabs, and a portable sequencing device. We don't know, but you're the first living individual we've identified with this ancestry. There have been samples, tissue fragments, hair with intact roots, bone fragments with preserved DNA, all from the Pacific Northwest, all from sources that were never officially documented. You're talking about Bigfoot, Marcus said flatly. The silence that followed confirmed everything. Dr. Chen's expression didn't change. We're talking about a relic population of Homo, possibly H, Heidelbergensis ancestry, or a sister lineage that survived in extreme isolation. The scientific community has dismissed reports for decades because the signal-to-noise ratio was untenable. But genetic evidence doesn't lie, Mr. Sullivan. You exist. Therefore, so does your mother's people. Marcus stood abruptly, the chair scraping against worn floorboards. He walked to the window, watching rain cascade down glass, distorting the dark tree line beyond. His mother's face rose in memory. The broadness of her features, the ridge of her brow that his father called aristocratic, the way she'd never sweated, even on the hottest August days. How she'd taught him to walk without sound, to read the forest like a language written in scent and shadow. "What do you want from me?" he asked, not turning around. "Cooperation," Dr. Chen said. "We need comprehensive sampling, tissue biopsy, full metabolic workup, MRI, cognitive assessments. Your hybridization presents unprecedented opportunities to understand human evolution, disease resistance, adaptive traits. I'm not a lab rat, Mr. Sullivan. Your genome may hold solutions to cancer, autoimmune diseases, metabolic disorders." "No." Marcus turned, and something in his expression made both scientists lean back. "You want to map me like a resource. What about them? My mother's people. Do they know you've been collecting their DNA without consent?" Dr. Ortega exchanged a glance with Dr. Chen. "The samples we've obtained came from already deceased individuals, or were collected as unidentified biological evidence." "Stolen," Marcus interrupted, "from bodies you found. From people who died trying to avoid exactly this." Dr. Chen's jaw tightened. "We're trying to help." "Help who?" Marcus's voice dropped to something almost growling. "You're here because I'm already exposed. Because I was stupid enough to spit in a tube and mail it to a company that sells data. What happens when this gets out? When people know there's a population out there with DNA that's worth billions in patents?" The rain intensified, a roar that filled the silence. Dr. Ortega spoke carefully. "There are protocols. The Endangered Species Act, tribal sovereignty agreements, federal wilderness protections. You think laws will stop gene hunters, pharmaceutical companies, trophy hunters who want to mount a cryptid's head on their wall?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "My mother spent her whole life hiding what she was. She died alone in the woods, rather than risk exposure. And you want me to help you expose everyone like her?" Dr. Chen powered off the tablet. "What do you want, Mr. Sullivan?" Marcus looked at them both, these scientists with their good intentions and catastrophic naivety. "I want you to leave. I need to think. We can't just—" "You knocked on my door without a warrant," Marcus said quietly. "I haven't committed a crime. Genetic privacy laws protect me from forced disclosure. So unless you're arresting me, we're done." Dr. Chen and Dr. Ortega gathered their equipment slowly, reluctance in every movement. At the door, Dr. Ortega handed Marcus a card. "If you change your mind, if you want to understand what you are fully, we can help." After they left, Marcus stood in the center of his cabin, listening to their vehicle struggle down the muddy road until the engine sound faded completely. Then he opened the locked drawer beneath his bed and removed the box his father had given him on his deathbed. Inside were items he'd never understood: a woven cedar strip with symbols he couldn't read, a carved bone tool, and a leather journal, his father's handwriting filling pages with maps and warnings, and a single phrase repeated on the final page: "They'll come for you eventually. When they do, remember, she made me promise to keep you hidden. But you're old enough now to choose. Find them, Marcus. Find your mother's family. Decide for yourself what should remain secret." Beneath the words was a hand-drawn map of the Olympic Mountain's deepest valleys, with an X marked in a region even modern topography labeled unmapped terrain. Marcus pressed his palm against the window, watching his handprint fog the cold glass. His reflection stared back, too tall, too broad through the shoulders, eyes that caught light like a predator's. For 43 years he'd told himself he was simply an outlier, a genetic anomaly within normal human variation. Now he knew the truth. And now, so did the NIH. The rain continued to fall, washing away tracks, eroding certainty, turning the forest beyond his cabin into a blurred threshold between the world of documentation and the world of shadows. His mother had walked back into that threshold when he was 12 years old and never returned. Marcus looked down at the journal, at the map, at the coordinates written in his father's careful hand. For the first time in his life, he understood where he needed to go. Marcus stood at the trailhead where his father's map began, a slash of overgrown logging road that ended abruptly at a wall of old-growth forest. The sign was still there, weathered but legible. No public access. Unstable terrain. Behind that official warning, someone had carved a second message into the wood decades ago, the letters filled with moss. The forest keeps its own. It was November 15th. Dawn barely breaking through the perpetual cloud cover that shrouded the Olympic Peninsula. Marcus had left his cabin 3 days ago with only essentials: a pack loaded with preservationist rations, water filtration, topographic printouts, and the cedar strip artifact from his mother's box. He'd told no one where he was going. His truck was now parked 15 miles behind him, hidden under camo tarp off a decommissioned Forest Service road. If Dr. Chen and her team were monitoring him, and he assumed they were, he'd made the trail sufficiently difficult to follow. He'd walked stream beds, doubled back through rocky terrain that held no prints, moved only at night through open areas visible to satellite surveillance. The techniques came instinctively, muscle memory from childhood lessons his mother had drilled into him before she vanished. Walk where water walks, sleep where stone sleeps, be quiet like the moss. The deep country swallowed him within 50 yards. These were trees that predated European contact, Douglas firs and western red cedars that formed a canopy so dense the forest floor existed in permanent twilight. Nurse logs the size of vehicles lay rotting, feeding the next generation. Everything smelled of decay and growth simultaneously, the rich humus of decomposition, the sharp green of sword ferns, the fungal sweetness of chanterelles pushing through damp earth. Marcus moved through it like he was remembering, not discovering. His body knew this terrain even though his conscious mind had never mapped it. He placed each foot precisely, avoided game trails that showed signs of human attention, and listened to the forest with senses that picked up frequencies beyond normal human range. On the second day into trackless wilderness, he found the first marker. It wasn't obvious, just a configuration of stones near a creek crossing, 3 flat river rocks stacked with the smallest on bottom, largest on top, inverted from how erosion would naturally deposit them. Marcus crouched beside it, running his fingers over the pattern. His mother had made similar stacks in the woods behind their cabin, small shrines he'd dismissed as artistic impulses. Now he understood. They were signposts, a language written in stone. He built his own stack 20 yards upstream, an acknowledgement, an announcement. I'm here. I'm looking for you. The forest watched him. Marcus felt it in his bones, the sensation of being observed by intelligence that didn't move, didn't breathe, just held perfectly still and waited for him to make a mistake. He didn't make mistakes. On the third day, the terrain shifted into terrain that shouldn't exist, a valley his topographic maps showed as a ridge. Either the USGS surveys were wrong, or something about the way light and elevation played tricks in this particular drainage created a perceptual inconsistency that had never been corrected. Marcus followed the creek downward into a gorge, so steep and tangled with deadfall that no rational human would attempt passage. He attempted it anyway. 6 hours of crawling under logs, chimneying down rock faces using root systems as anchors, wading through pools of snowmelt so cold his legs went numb. When he finally emerged into the valley floor, the forest had changed. The trees here were older, larger, their trunks so massive his arms couldn't span a quarter of their circumference. The understory was different too, more open, maintained, as if something large moved through regularly and cleared paths. Marcus made camp near a spring, building a minimal shelter from a tarp and sitting with his back against stone. He didn't light a fire. Instead, he sat in darkness, chewing dried venison and waiting. They came at moonrise. He didn't see them approach, just suddenly became aware of presences in the darkness beyond his camp. Large bodies moving with absolute silence, positioned in a semicircle around his shelter. The smell hit him next. Musk and pine resin and something else, a scent he recognized from childhood, from his mother's hair after she'd been in the forest for days. Marcus didn't move. He kept his hands visible, resting on his knees, and spoke quietly in English. My name is Marcus Sullivan. My mother was Sarah. She came from here, from you. She died 31 years ago. I've come to understand where she came from. The silence stretched. Then, from the darkness directly ahead, a voice, low, resonant, shaped around words that English wasn't designed for. Sarah who left. We remember. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. You speak English. Some words. Trade language. Long time ago, before... The voice made a gesture Marcus couldn't see but somehow understood, before hiding became permanent. May I see you? Marcus asked. A pause. Then, you see tomorrow. Daylight. Tonight we see you. Marcus understood. This was assessment, verification. They needed to confirm he was what he claimed. Sarah's son. Not a threat, not a trap. He remained still, while shapes moved in his peripheral vision, massive and bipedal, with a careful intelligence in how they circled his camp without disturbing the vegetation. One approached close enough that Marcus could make out details. A figure over 7 feet tall, covered in reddish-brown hair that lay flat and sleek rather than shaggy. A face that was both human and utterly alien. A heavy brow ridge, a broad, flat nose, eyes that reflected his faint moonlight like a cat's tapetum lucidum. The features were strong, not brutish. Noble, Marcus thought. His mother's cheekbones widened and strengthened. The figure crouched, bringing its face level with Marcus's. It studied him with an intensity that stripped away pretense. Then it reached out one massive hand, fingers proportioned correctly but thick, with nails worn flat from digging, and touched Marcus's face. The contact was gentle, exploratory. Fingers traced his brow, his cheekbone, his jaw, reading him through touch. Marcus held perfectly still, barely breathing. The figure made a sound, a low vocalization that might have been satisfaction or grief. Then it withdrew, melting back into darkness. Tomorrow, the voice repeated. We speak. They left as silently as they'd arrived. Marcus sat in his shelter until dawn, not sleeping, processing the fact that his mother's people were real. They remembered her, and they'd accepted him enough to promise conversation. When sunrise finally penetrated the valley, Marcus found offerings outside his camp, a haunch of elk meat, still fresh, a bundle of cedar bark, the strips already processed for weaving, and the cedar artifact from his mother's box. which he'd left in his pack, now sitting atop a flat stone with a new carving added to its symbols. He understood the message. We've seen everything you carry. We know why you're here. Now we'll decide what happens next. Marcus followed the creek upstream as instructed by the subtle markers, a bent branch here, a scraped tree trunk there, until he reached a clearing where the forest opened to reveal ancient rockfall. Boulders the size of houses had tumbled from cliffs above centuries ago, creating caves and sheltered overhangs. Smoke rose from multiple points, not from open fires, but from small, nearly smokeless heating stones placed strategically to disperse signature. They were waiting for him. 12 individuals, ranging in size from a juvenile about Marcus's height to a massive elder whose shoulders were broader than a doorway, all covered in varying shades of hair, brown, reddish-brown, one pale grey that spoke of advanced age. They wore minimal clothing, mostly hides worked soft and layered strategically for warmth rather than modesty. Tools hung from braided bark belts, stone blades, bone awls, digging sticks worn smooth with use. The one who'd touched his face the previous night stood slightly forward. In daylight, Marcus could see her clearly. Female, based on the slight breast tissue visible beneath the hair and the narrower shoulders compared to the male's. Her eyes were deeply brown, intelligent and wary. "I am Hannah," she said, the name awkward in her mouth but recognizable. "Sarah's sister cousin, your mother's—" She gestured in a way that implied complex kinship. "You are Marcus, hybrid, between Walker." Marcus found his voice. "Yes, I came to understand, to meet you. My DNA was discovered by scientists, government researchers. They know about me now. I needed to warn you, to learn." Anna raised a hand, silencing him. "We know. Government has always known. They find bodies sometimes, take samples. We allow old ones already dead to be found. Keeps them looking wrong places. The strategy was elegant and terrible. A calculated sacrifice of their dead to misdirect the living." "How many of you are there?" Marcus asked. Hannah exchanged glances with the elder, who made a gesture that seemed to grant permission. 300, maybe less now. We are—" she struggled for the word. "Small group, bottleneck, genetic bottleneck." Marcus understood immediately. With only 300 individuals, they were critically endangered. Every birth essential, every death catastrophic. "The scientists want to study me," Marcus said. "They think my genetics could help human medicine. But I know if I cooperate, it leads back to you. They'll want more samples, living subjects, documentation." "No documentation," Hannah said sharply. "That is extinction. Once catalogued, we become property, resource. They take children for study, take women for—" She made a gesture that encompassed violation and forced reproduction. "We know history. We know what happened to other people when visibility came." Marcus thought of the Tasmanian genocide, the exhibition of Otabenga, the medical experimentation on indigenous populations. She was right. Documentation was erasure with bureaucratic stamps. "Then what do we do?" Marcus asked. "I can refuse the NIH, but my DNA is already in their system. Other people might test, might show similar markers if they have your ancestry in their bloodlines." "Few hybrids survive," Hannah interrupted. "Your mother was rare, strong enough to walk in both worlds. Most children born between us and humans die young or are—" She touched her temple. "Not right here. You survived. Strong. Lucky." Marcus felt the weight of that statement. His very existence was statistical improbability. "What happened to my mother?" he asked quietly. "My father said she died in these mountains, but he never told me how." Hannah's expression shifted to something Marcus recognized as grief. "She came back to us, after your father couldn't protect both worlds anymore. Too much human attention. She walked in one last time, to the high places, and didn't walk out. We found her body 3 winters later. Respectful death, chosen death, not an accident, a decision. His mother had chosen to die as herself, in her own territory, rather than risk exposure that would endanger her people." I have her burial map, Marcus said. My father marked it. Would you take me there? The request hung in the air. The elder male spoke for the first time, his voice deeper and more carefully modulated than Hana's. That is sacred place. Only family walks there. I am family, Marcus said. The elder studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Yes, Between Walker is still family. Hana will take you. 3 days' walk. Over the following week, Marcus lived among them, learning, observing, negotiating the unspoken rules of a culture that had survived by becoming invisible. They showed him how they processed food, how they built seasonal shelters that left no trace, how they moved through the forest with a coordination that suggested complex communication beyond vocalization. He learned their sign language, a sophisticated system of gestures that allowed conversation while hunting or at distances where sound carried dangerously. He learned their protocols for avoiding detection. Never travel the same route consecutively, never leave scat in open areas, disperse hair shed during grooming into water or fire, bury all refuse deep. They were not primitive. They were adapted, specialized survivors who had traded technological complexity for invisibility and autonomy. The communication breakthrough came on the 4th day, when Hana brought him a flat section of bark covered in pictographs. Not written language, but a symbolic system that recorded events, territories, and genealogies. She pointed to a figure with one hand dark, one hand light, the symbol for hybrid individuals. 17 hybrids in our records, she explained. Most from long ago, before we learned separation was necessary. Your mother was the last to choose human world for time, then return. You are the last born. Marcus traced the pictographs, understanding that he was looking at a document more precious than anything in a museum, an indigenous history recorded by hands that museums claimed were incapable of complex thought. I can help protect this, he said suddenly. I can refuse scientific cooperation, but I can also work with conservationists, tribal authorities, people who understand that some populations must remain uncontacted to survive. I can be a voice without revealing details. Hana considered this. You would be guardian, between walker who keeps secrets. Yes, Marcus said. I can tell them a population exists, that it's protected under existing laws, that any attempt at documentation will be resisted. I can be the interface without being a doorway. The elder male, whose name Marcus learned was Kale, spoke again. This is dangerous path. You become target, threat. People will want to make you speak, make you guide them here. Then I move, Marcus said. I stay unpredictable. I live how you live. No permanent location, always watching. Hana and Kyle exchanged a long glance, a conversation happening in expressions Marcus was still learning to read. Finally, Hana nodded. We make pact, she said. You protect by not speaking details. We protect by staying hidden. If you are caught, if you are forced, I don't know your location, Marcus interrupted. This valley isn't on any map I'm carrying. I could never find it again without your guidance. That's the truth I can tell under any pressure. It was true. The route here had been so convoluted, so dependent on subtle markers and intentional geographic confusion, that Marcus couldn't retrace it if his life depended on it. Hana extended her hand, a human gesture learned from contact generations ago. Marcus took it, feeling the incredible strength in her grip, the calluses that spoke of a life lived directly against the elements. Pact, she said. You are family. Between Walker. You carry our memory in your blood and your silence. That evening, they held a ceremony around a carefully concealed fire, each member of the group approaching Marcus to touch his head, his shoulders, his hands, claiming him as kin, marking him with scent and recognition. The juvenile, a male about 16 who reminded Marcus painfully of what he might have looked like at that age, brought him a carved bone tool. For you, the young male said in halting English, family tool. Make cutting, make shelter, make protection. Marcus accepted it with reverence, understanding that he was receiving an artifact that represented inclusion, not just acknowledgement. Later, alone with Hannah at the edge of the camp, Marcus asked the question that had haunted him since the geneticist's visit. Are you dying out? Is the population stable? Hannah was quiet for a long time. We are slow birth people. One child every many years. Not enough genetic mixing anymore. Too few of us, too related. Some children born wrong, not viable. We need, she struggled for the concept, new blood. But that means contact. Contact means risk. Hybrids? Marcus asked. Maybe, Hannah said softly. If humans could be trusted, if children could be raised, knowing both worlds without one world destroying the other. Your mother tried that. She succeeded with you, but cost was high. She lost everything to keep you safe. Marcus felt the weight of his mother's sacrifice settle over him like a physical pressure. She'd walked away from her people, lived in isolation with a human man, raised a hybrid son in secrecy, and then, when the risk became too great, erased herself to protect everyone she loved. I won't let that be meaningless, Marcus said. I'll guard this, whatever it takes. Hannah reached out and did what her people did for comfort, placed her broad palm against the side of Marcus's face, thumb against his temple, fingers spread across his skull. The gesture was ancient, primate, a reassurance that transcended language. You are good, between Walker, she said. Sarah chose well when she chose your father, made you strong enough for both worlds. The next morning, Hannah took him to his mother's burial site, a cave high in the cliffs, accessible only by a climb that would defeat most humans, but that Marcus, with his hybrid strength and reach, managed with Hannah's patient guidance. Inside, the cave opened into a chamber where the stone was smooth and dry. His mother's remains rested on a platform of cedar boughs, still recognizable after 3 decades because the cave's environment had naturally mummified the body. She was covered in a woven cedar blanket, her face peaceful, the bones of her structure clearly showing her heritage. The robust frame, the heavy brow, the proportions that were just slightly wrong for pure Homo sapiens. Beside her body were items, a basket of her weaving, a stone toolkit, and a small carved figure of a human and one of her people standing hand in hand. She wanted you to know, Hannah said quietly, that she loved both worlds, that you were not mistake, you were hope. Marcus knelt beside his mother's platform, tears streaming silently down his face. He placed his hand over hers, bones now, but still the hand that had taught him to walk quietly, to read the forest, to survive as something neither world fully acknowledged. I'll remember, he whispered. I'll protect them. I promise. He left a strand of his own hair woven into the cedar blanket, a marker of his visit, a continuation of lineage, a promise kept. Marcus returned to civilization on November 28th, walking out of the forest 15 miles from where he'd entered, his appearance calculated to suggest he'd been on a difficult but ordinary backpacking trip. He'd used his satellite communicator to call for a ride from a trail angel contact, a grizzled former logger who asked no questions about extended wilderness stays. His truck was undisturbed, but a GPS tracker had been magnetically attached to the undercarriage, federal issue based on the model. Marcus left it in place. Better to know he was being monitored than to alert them to his awareness. The drive back to his cabin took 3 hours. When he arrived, Dr. Chen and Dr. Ortega were waiting on his porch. Mr. Sullivan, Dr. Chen said, standing as he approached. We've been trying to reach you for 2 weeks. I was hiking, Marcus said flatly, unlocking his door. No cell service in the back country. We know, Dr. Ortega said. We tracked your communicator's last ping. You went into an area with no established trails, high avalanche danger, and multiple recent cougar attacks. We were preparing a search and rescue. I'm an experienced woodsman, Marcus interrupted. I don't need rescuing. Dr. Chen followed him inside, uninvited. Mr. Sullivan, while you were gone, we completed preliminary analysis of your genetic markers. The implications are extraordinary. We're prepared to offer full partnership. You maintain control over all samples, you're credited on all publications, and we establish protocols that respect your privacy and autonomy." Marcus set his pack down carefully, buying time to compose his response. During his weeks in the forest, he'd rehearsed this conversation 100 times with Hannah's guidance. "I appreciate the offer," he said, "but I'm declining further participation." Dr. Chen's expression hardened. "Mr. Sullivan, your genome represents a unique window into human evolution." "My genome is mine," Marcus said quietly. "Gina protects me from compelled genetic disclosure. The samples you have from the commercial database were obtained with consent for ancestry analysis only, not research. If you use them for publication without my explicit permission, I'll sue for violation of privacy and bioprospecting without consent." Dr. Ortega stepped forward, his tone more conciliatory. "We're not trying to exploit you. But Marcus, can I call you Marcus? You have resistance to dozens of diseases that kill millions of people every year. Your metabolic efficiency could help address obesity, diabetes, metabolic syndrome. Your bone density and healing factors could revolutionize orthopedics. Don't you feel an obligation to share that?" It was a good argument. Marcus had anticipated it. "I feel an obligation to the people who gave me those traits," he said, "and they've made their position clear. They want to be left alone. They've survived specifically because they've remained undocumented. The moment I become a research subject, I become a map pointing directly to them." "We wouldn't," Dr. Chen began. "Yes, you would," Marcus interrupted, "not intentionally. But my metabolic markers lead to adaptive responses shaped by specific environmental pressures. My disease resistance suggests exposure patterns consistent with particular regions. My morphological traits narrow the geographic range. Even without meaning to, you'd create a searchable profile." Dr. Chen's silence confirmed the accuracy of his assessment. "There's also the patent issue," Marcus continued. "Once my genome is published, pharmaceutical companies can file patents on the unique sequences. Those patents would legally establish ownership over genetic material that isn't just mine. It belongs to a population that never consented to commercialization." Dr. Ortega sat down heavily. "So what do we do? Pretend you don't exist?" "You acknowledge that a relic hominin population exists in North America," Marcus said. "You publish that finding based on the archaic DNA samples you've already collected from deceased individuals. You recommend extreme conservation measures, no-contact protocols, similar to the Sentinelese or Amazon uncontacted tribes. You make it illegal to pursue them. The scientific community will demand proof," Dr. Chen said. "Genetic sequences, morphological data, population surveys. Then the scientific community will remain unsatisfied," Marcus said. "Some things are more important than satisfying academic curiosity." Dr. Chen's jaw tightened with frustration. "You're asking us to protect a population we can't study, can't monitor for disease or genetic viability, can't help if they face extinction threats. They've managed for hundreds of thousands of years without your help," Marcus said. "They'll continue managing." "With a bottlenecked population of 300 individuals?" Dr. Chen said sharply. The number hung in the air, a slip, a reveal that told Marcus exactly how much surveillance had been conducted. They'd tracked him, likely with drone coverage or satellite imaging, sophisticated enough to detect heat signatures through forest canopy. They'd counted the group he'd met with. Marcus's expression didn't change. "So you were watching?" "We have an obligation to assess threats to national security and ecological integrity," Dr. Chen said, not quite apologizing. "An uncontacted hominin population represents both. We needed to confirm they exist, evaluate their technological level, assess potential risks." "They're not a threat," Marcus said coldly. "They want exactly what you should want: separation. They have no interest in human contact, no desire for integration, no plans for expansion. They just want to survive in the territories they've held for millennia." Dr. Ortega leaned forward. Marcus, with only 300 individuals, they're facing genetic collapse within a few generations. Inbreeding depression, loss of genetic diversity, accumulation of deleterious mutations. They're already showing signs, aren't they? Increased juvenile mortality, congenital issues, reduced fertility. Marcus said nothing, which was confirmation enough. We could help, Dr. Ortega pressed. Genetic counseling, assisted reproductive technology, even carefully managed outbreeding programs. You mean capturing them for IVF? Marcus said flatly. Harvesting eggs and sperm, creating hybrid embryos in labs, that's not conservation, that's domestication. It's survival, Dr. Chen countered. In 50 years, that population may not exist. Their best chance is management, documentation, scientific intervention. No, Marcus said. Their best chance is what they've always done. Stay hidden, stay free, and occasionally, very occasionally, choose their own mixing events with humans they trust. The implications settled over the room. Dr. Ortega's eyes widened. You're going back. You're planning to contribute to their genetic diversity. I'm planning to live my life, Marcus said carefully. If that life involves extended periods in the wilderness, maintaining connections with my mother's people, and potentially partnering with someone from that population, that's my personal choice, not a research program. Dr. Chen stood abruptly. We can't allow that. Unauthorized genetic mixing with an uncontacted population violates multiple ethical standards. Name the law I'd be breaking, Marcus challenged. Specifically, I'm a private citizen engaging in consensual relationships. There's no legal framework that prevents me from having children with someone from an uncontacted population, especially since I'm genetically part of that population. Dr. Chen and Dr. Ortega exchanged frustrated glances. They had no answer because Marcus was right. Legally, he existed in a gray zone where his hybrid status gave him unique autonomy. We'll be watching, Dr. Chen finally said. If you lead others to that population, if you facilitate contact that puts them at risk, if you introduce diseases or disrupt their social structure, then you'll do exactly what? Marcus asked quietly. Arrest me for visiting my relatives? The optics on that would be spectacular. Dr. Chen gathered her tablet, defeat and anger warring in her expression. You're making a mistake. That population needs scientific protection, managed conservation, regular health monitoring. That population needs to be left alone, Marcus said. That's the only protection that's worked for them so far. After they left, Marcus sat in his cabin for a long time, processing the confrontation. He'd won this round, but it wasn't over. The government now knew approximately where the population was located, how many individuals comprised the group, and that Marcus had direct contact. The surveillance would intensify. He needed to become untraceable. Over the next 3 months, Marcus systematically erased his footprint. He sold his cabin to a cash buyer through a blind trust, liquidated his assets into cryptocurrency and precious metals, and established multiple false identities with the help of a privacy consultant who specialized in helping abuse survivors disappear. He moved constantly. 3 weeks in British Columbia, 2 months in Alaska, a season guiding in Montana under an assumed name. He used his hybrid endurance to take jobs in extreme environments where background checks were minimal and turnover was high. He became what his mother had been, a between-walker, visible enough to avoid suspicion, invisible enough to avoid documentation. And twice a year, he returned to the Olympic wilderness through routes that changed each time, never staying long enough to establish patterns. On one of those visits, during a late spring snowmelt, Anna told him the juvenile who'd given him the bone tool had died of a congenital heart defect, a defect increasingly common in their population as the genetic bottleneck tightened. We are losing, she said quietly, not to hunters or governments, to our own isolation. Marcus sat with her on a sun-warmed boulder above the valley, watching cloud shadows move across the canopy. What do you want to do? What Sarah did, Hannah said. Choose carefully, mix selectively, Risk visibility for survival. She looked at him directly. You are proof it can work. Strong, healthy, able to move in both worlds. We need more of you. You're asking me to... I'm asking if you would share genetics, Hannah said bluntly. Not as experiment, as family, as continuation. She paused. And I'm asking if you know others who could be trusted, humans who could partner without documenting, who could keep children safe. Marcus thought of the carefully cultivated network he'd been building. Indigenous activists, radical conservationists, people who understood that some survival required secrecy, people who'd proven through decades of protecting sacred sites and fugitive populations that they could keep secrets even when pressured. I might know a few, he said carefully. Women who want children but don't want the surveillance state involved. Men who've proven they can live off-grid and raise kids without documentation. People who understand what's at stake. Then we make new pact, Hannah said. Careful mixing. Chosen partners. Children raised knowing both worlds but protected from visibility. She placed her hand on his shoulder. You become more than guardian. You become bridge. That's dangerous, Marcus said. For me, for anyone involved, for the children. All survival is dangerous now, Hannah replied. We choose which danger is worth risk. Marcus spent that visit meeting the other adults in the group, learning who was interested in outbreeding, who had reached reproductive age, who had genetic profiles that most needed diversity. The discussions were pragmatic, even clinical. This was survival calculus, not romance. But there was also tenderness. The young female who'd recently lost a pregnancy approached him, asking if he'd father a child with her when she was ready to try again. Strong genetics, she said, touching his arm. Good survival traits, good mind. She said it the way one might compliment a prized breeding stallion, but the hope in her eyes was entirely human. Marcus agreed, understanding that he was committing to a form of kinship that existed outside all human legal frameworks. These children, if they survived, would be his responsibility, not in the nuclear family sense, but in the broader clan sense. He would be uncle, provider, protector, teacher. He would be what his father had been, a human who loved across species boundaries and accepted the consequences. Over the next 5 years, 3 children were born, 2 from Marcus's genetics, 1 with Hannah's younger cousin, 1 with the female who'd asked him first. 1 from a carefully selected human partner, a Salish botanist named Teresa, who'd spent 20 years documenting traditional plants and keeping sacred sites secret. She agreed to the arrangement with clear eyes, understanding that her daughter would grow up between worlds, would never have a birth certificate or social security number, would exist in the gaps of bureaucratic visibility. The children thrived. Hybrid vigor, Hannah called it. The genetic benefits of outcrossing after generations of bottleneck. They were strong, clever, curious. And they were taught from their first words the sacred importance of silence. Marcus watched his daughter. He thought of her as his, even though she lived with Hannah's group and called multiple adults father in their gestural language, learned to walk soundlessly before she could speak in sentences. Watched her learn to read the forest, to understand the signals that meant hide or climb, or go still and be stone. She would survive. That was the promise he'd made, the pact he'd honored. On a cold November evening, 12 years after his DNA test results had shattered his world, Marcus sat in a rented cabin in the Cascade foothills, writing in a journal he'd started keeping. Not a record of locations or names, that would be too dangerous, but reflections on what it meant to be a guardian of the invisible. A knock came at the door. Marcus tensed, hand moving to the knife he kept sheathed at his belt. But the voice that called out was familiar. Dr. Ortega, older now, his tone weary rather than urgent. Marcus, I'm alone. Just need to talk. No official business. Marcus opened the door cautiously. Doctor. Ortega looked exhausted, his hair grayer, his face carved with lines that spoke of bureaucratic battles and ethical compromises. You won, Dr. Ortega said without preamble. The NIH formally closed the investigation. We published the archaic DNA findings as tissue samples of unknown origin from Pacific Northwest, consistent with uncontacted relic population, and recommended no-contact protocols. It took 12 years, 3 administrations, and 4 congressional hearings. But it's done. They're legally protected under emergency endangered species listing. Marcus stared at him. Why tell me? Because you should know, Dr. Ortega said. You fought for their invisibility. You won. They're as safe as bureaucracy can make them. He paused. Dr. Chen retired last year. She never accepted that some populations should remain unstudied. But I've come around to your position. You were right. Documentation would have destroyed them. What changed your mind? Marcus asked. Dr. Ortega smiled sadly. I have a granddaughter. She's autistic, needs specialized support, can't handle overwhelming stimuli. Watching her navigate a world that constantly demands she perform visibility for others' comfort, it made me understand. Sometimes survival means being allowed to exist on your own terms, without documentation, without performing for the comfort of those who think they're helping. Marcus felt something release in his chest, a tension he'd carried for over a decade. Thank you, he said quietly. Don't thank me, Dr. Ortega said. Just keep doing what you're doing. Keep them hidden. Keep them safe. He turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, your mother would be proud. After he left, Marcus stood on the porch, watching stars emerge between clouds. Somewhere in the mountains, his daughter was learning to read constellations with her clan, learning the stories her grandmother had known, learning to survive in the margins of a world that had no category for what she was. She would never be documented, never be catalogued, never be forced to explain her existence to satisfy someone else's curiosity. She would simply be, and Marcus, the between-walker, would make sure that remained possible. He closed the journal and added it to the fireproof box where he kept the few items that mattered: his mother's cedar artifact, his father's maps, and 3 tiny braided bracelets, gifts from his children, woven from cedar bark and their own hair, tokens of a lineage that existed outside official record. The rain began again, the eternal northwest rain that washed away tracks and kept the deep country secret. Marcus listened to it hammer the roof and felt for the first time in years something close to peace. Some stories, he thought, were never meant to be told in full. Some populations were never meant to be found. And some people, between walkers like him, like his mother, like the careful handful of chosen partners who'd agreed to help, existed precisely to make sure that remained true. The forest kept its own, and Marcus kept the forest. What would you do if a DNA test revealed you weren't entirely human? Would you choose science or secrecy, visibility or survival? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story made you think about genetics, identity, and what we owe to populations that want to remain hidden, hit that subscribe button for more speculative fiction that explores the edges of what it means to be human. Next week, the last Denisovan cave. What if we found them alive? And what if they didn't want to be saved? Subscribe now and join the conversation about the species we share this planet with, the ones we've documented and the ones we haven't.